I'm Lei Mohr. I have had several near-death, shared-death experiences, and I have a new channeling that has been given to me in the last year, where they gave me a different kind of a process. But who am I? I grew up in a very traumatic life, which was the foundation to give me the compassion to be able to work with people now to work through their own traumas. And all of my experiences I see as a singular timeline, but different, like, chapters of the same timeline. So that's who I am. And now I'll go into the story. I was 21. It was just after the birth of my second son, and it had been a very difficult process. He was an extremely active child. They had to, as I was in labor, reach up inside of me with their hands and turn him around multiple times to try and get him straight so he would come out without being breached and without cords around his neck. I don't blame them for anything that happened afterward. They were doing the best they could at the time. I was in the hospital. I was on the bed. I had a fever. I saw the thermometer of 111 Fahrenheit, which is 44 degrees Celsius. I mean, I was basically comatose because you can't do anything when you've got that kind of a fever. And then, for no apparent reason, I sat up and I looked back at myself, still laying on the bed. And then I floated out of my body and into a very dark tunnel. Blacker than black. There is nothing you can see, feel. There are no physical, any kind of emotions or anything at all, except I was in complete bliss, complete love, safety, joy. It was the most beautiful place in the world. And I just floated through it very calmly because it felt so good. And then I got to what I considered to be a room. It was still completely black, but it felt wider. And I felt like I stopped. And I'm like, okay, it still feels so safe, so wonderful, so loving. I'm okay with it. And then I heard a voice, which I perceived to be male. I couldn't see anything, so I don't say there was anything else there. I just heard this voice, and it asked, do you want to come now? Very peacefully, non-judgmentally. And I thought, I'm being asked to make a choice here. And this happened instantly. And I thought, I can't. I have two children to raise. I have to go back. And I felt, more than even heard or thought or anything, I felt a nod of a head. No judgment, completely at peace. And then I went back down the tunnel, plopped back in my body, and the fever broke like that, and I was out of the hospital the next day. And what I had learned from this experience is that I was empowered. I had a reason to be here. I had chosen to be here, and I had a purpose in being here. And from that, I moved on, and I'm just going to say, because I was now empowered and I knew who I was, that marriage ended very quickly, and I moved on. And then several years went by. At this point in time, this was back in the 1980s, the early 1980s. You didn't know about these things. You didn't talk about these things. You didn't say anything, because if you did, people thought you were either crazy or they thought you were just lying, any of which didn't seem like a good path to me. So I pushed it all down inside of me and I hid it for several decades. Didn't even touch it. Didn't mention it. Didn't remember it. Nothing. I did remember being empowered, though. So I moved on from that and moved through my life. And then eventually I got to a point where I was at a different place in life. And I knew that things could be different than what I had. And it was really difficult for me to be in two worlds at one time, but I didn't know how to move out of it. So at this point in time, I got really, really sick again, a high fever. I didn't measure it this time, but I know it was really high. It was the middle of summer, blazing hot, and I was covered in every blanket, every piece of clothing I could, and I was still shivering. I stayed that way for a couple of days, and during that couple of days, I left and went somewhere. I can't tell you how I left, but I went to another place. And this place was a kind of a completely foggy or indistinct place, and the color was kind of brown, orange, pink, but it was warm. It was completely loving. It was a happy place to be, and no judgment at all. And I was surrounded by beings. I don't know who they were because I couldn't see them, but I knew they were there because they were chanting to me over and over and over. You have done what you came here to do. And I thought, oh, that's nice. Oh, that's nice. What? Wait a minute. What? And then instantly I was back in my body. And I thought, huh, if I've done what I came here to do, why am I still here? And then I started really looking into the spiritual nature of dying in particular, because I thought, well, maybe my time here is limited and maybe I should figure out how to shore up all the loose ends, how to do this nicely, gracefully, as much as possible. And so I started with Ram Dass, who was my first teacher for this. And I studied absolutely everything from him. And there came a point in time, I woke up from being sick and I was so weak. I knew I would never get my full strength back, but I knew that I could learn. So I was sitting on the couch one day because I couldn't do much else. I'm still not moving around very much. And I looked out my door, and this is December. It's not the fruiting time of year or anything, but I looked out my window and I saw walking past my carport a figure in a robe. And I'm like, oh, what? And then I thought about it. I looked at it again. The figure was Ram Dass. It happened to be 2 days after he left Forum. He left on December 23rd, and this was on December 25th. And because I had studied him so much, because I knew that he did not want us to be grieving for him, but rather to be celebrating that he was now in his full freedom. And I felt that, and I saw that for him. And he was visiting me. And he left me on my yard in the shape of a diamond, 4 guavas, way out of season, that had never been there before as a gift. And so I moved on from that, and now I'm to the point where I can't work a regular job, but I am able to move about, and I've got some real skills that I think can really help people. So I'm getting into the life coaching or guiding, whatever you want to call it, and I'm helping people that way. But I realized I wasn't quite doing what I needed to do. There was something holding me back. And I knew it had to be my traumatic past with my mother. And I'm looking for ways to deal with my traumatic past. And I had a friend, and she said, I had a similar past. And I learned how to see it as they were loving me enough to give me the foundation for what I needed to do. And I thought, oh, that's cool, but that's not my story. That's not my story. But I couldn't get past it still. So finally one day I said to everything, nothing, whatever, the universe, whatever you want to call it, I said, how can I get past it? And instantly I was put in a theater, an empty theater. All the seats are empty except one, the one that I'm in. It's completely black around me, and I can see the stage up ahead of me, but that's all there is. And then, one by one, people, the director, the producer, the writer of the show, and I came to know, because I saw them all, they were all me. As my story started playing across the stage, I was the main character, and all the other people in my life were the supporting actors, including my mother. And from this, I did come to the knowledge that we had chosen to be in the roles that we had been in. And she had loved me enough to do all those horrible things to me so that I could have the compassion to be able to help the people I help today. And then I was in complete bliss for about 3 or 4 months. And then in December of that year, for no apparent reason, I went from being in complete bliss, and then I woke up one morning and I was just anxious and jittery and just unsettled. And I mean, it was just overwhelming, and I could do nothing about it. I tried everything. I tried every method I could find. Nothing touched it. And for 3 days, this went on. And then on the third day, I woke up in complete bliss and freedom and joy. And I thought, oh, this is wonderful, but I have no idea why this happened. And then a little bit later, my brother called me. You see, my mother had been in prison for the last 15 years of her life for the murder of my sister-in-law. I had had no contact. I had not had any will to see her. The prison did have contact with my brother because, although completely exonerated from having anything to do with the crime, he was related to the crime. And so he was their contact. So my brother calls me and he says, I have to tell you, our mother died this morning. And I told him what I had just experienced. And I realized I had shared her experience of leaving form and of finding her freedom. And at that point, I understood the bliss, which I carry to this day. And she and I now have a closer relationship than we ever had when she was in form. And then there's one other caveat onto that. At the end is I work with entities that call themselves the wisdom keepers of lost civilizations, one of whom is an Atlantean. And she wanted very specifically for me to understand that the process and the actual act of leaving form does not necessarily need to be painful. In fact, it can be pain-free and stress-free. And the process of doing this is, they gave me the entire process. They even went through it with me and took me all the way to the point of just before leaving form, and then brought me back. And I thought, why did you bring me back? And they're like, you've got work to do here. You have people to help. And so many people can benefit from knowing this process. And it's a longer process than I can give you on this interview. So I'm going to leave it at that and open it up to you. The only awareness I had at all was when I looked back at my body and realized I wasn't in it. But there was no pain, there was no suffering, there was no, quote, death. It was just, there's a body and here I am. I didn't know that near-death experience existed. I had no clue what was happening to me. I had seen other people die, or I had seen other people after they had left form. I had seen their forms. I had never thought about it from my own perspective. I do not now fear death in the slightest. And I've found that when you don't fear death, you also don't fear life. And if you realize you, the energy that is you, will never die, cannot die. Energy cannot be killed. It takes away a lot of the stress. Your physical body becomes part of the earth in the cycles of the earth, but you yourself never die. I perceive that time as we know it, linear time, is a human invention. and that all time is one, all real time is one. So it could have been a second, it could have been hours, it could have been anything in linear time. But to me, it was just an experience. I was raised a very, very strict Catholic. And, you have these kinds of events and you're going to hell. And I really figured, if my life, my early years, which everyone said were heaven, with my mother, who was not very nice to me. And I mean, she had 6 kids in 7.5 years. I kind of understand she was overwhelmed. If that experience was heaven and these events would make me go to hell, which was much worse, I'm like, I want nothing to do with it. Nothing. And at the same point in time, like when I was about 5 years old, well, 3 years old, I could perceive clearly people's energy field before they came up to me, and I can still do that even over the internet. But I know their energy. It was partially a survival mechanism. I had to know my mother's energy when she entered the room before she got to me. So I knew if I had to hide. So I did that from the time I was at least 3. And then when I was about 5, I had another event where someone else and I are walking down the sidewalk, and there's a lady coming at us. And this lady, I knew, beyond the shadow of any doubt, complete truth, I knew she didn't like my dress. Why? I don't know. Did it matter? How did I know that? I just knew she didn't like my dress. And so I've had these kind of experiences all through my life, but because of that background, until I was about 13 when I started seeing some real issues with the way the teachings weren't matching up with what they said they were supposed to, that I was like, this kind of religion is not for me. If it's for somebody else, wonderful, fantastic. If it helps them, great. It's not for me. And that's when I split my 2 worlds, but I didn't know how to get into the other world for some time after that. I really see my entire life as a single experience with all these different little chapters in it, and I think they are all connected. At the time, I didn't even realize that it was a power. I didn't know it was any different, and if I had noticed it was different, I knew that would make me even more strange, and I was like, I wouldn't have done that. So I just kind of lived my life and kind of didn't really pay any attention to all these other things until it got to the point where it was like, okay, you are now going to pay attention to all of it. And it all flooded back to me. It happened to me because it's part of what I had signed up for before I got here. And that was, especially at this point in life, in the world, in humanity, as we're going through all these massive changes, I was to be here to be a change agent to help people deal with those traumas from the past so they could move into this new world that's coming. And that's why I went through all of this. My sons both have it in different ways. My granddaughter has it. My sister, who has since left her form, she had it. Some of the others, if they do, they might have it, but they're still hidden in that doctrine that says you don't have it. So I don't know about most of them, but I know that it, at least in my line and with my sister, it's really strong. And the first person I told was, well, actually my second really good yoga instructor. I told her about it because I knew that she was going to understand and she wasn't going to think I was crazy. And I thought, if she does, if she understands this and she doesn't think I'm crazy, then maybe I can start bringing it forward. So that was the first person I actually told. And she didn't think I was crazy. In fact, she's like, you should write a book. So I did. I have several books. The ones that deal with anything interesting are the one that's called I Didn't Choose This. No, actually, I Didn't Choose This Mess. And it's got all the weird things that happened in it kind of put together in a timeline. But it's written as a novel. And then there's the 2 most recent ones, Dream It, See It, Live It, which is a practical model of tools for younger people who are used to answers at the touch of a button, so it's written in little snippets so that it's easily digestible and easy to understand. It's called Dream It, See It, Live It. And it has the steps for being able to go from, why am I in this dead-end job, to the life that they want to live. And then the fifth one, actually, or is it the sixth? I can't remember, is There Was No Fear. And that's the one about the near-death experiences and my earlier life and how I got here, and all little interesting little experiences along the way that make the timeline what it is. This is where it gets really interesting for me, because I wrote the first couple of books on my own, and that's a process. That's a long process. You got to do the research, and you got to you got to put it together. You got to write it out first, then you got to go back and do all the editing, and I mean there's a huge process, and it takes years. The last two books were written in 2 weeks or less because I didn't write them. I was awakened at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was told, "You are going to write a book." And I said, "I am. What if I don't want to?" "You are going to write a book." And I mean, it's like, okay, it's so overpowering. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll get up. I'll do something. And the first night I woke up and they were doing that, they wrote the entire outline of it. Oh, okay, fine, I guess I'm writing a book. Now you're going to write right now. Okay. I'm sitting down in front of a computer right now. 2 weeks later, I had a complete book. How do I know I didn't write it? Because after I wrote it and I got to the end, I thought, oh, I forgot this and this and this and this, and I wrote them all down. And I checked the manuscript, and they were all there. Yes, I talk to them, but they are with me all the time. They are with me now. They are speaking through me. And I can tell that sometimes because the words that come out are not necessarily the words that I would necessarily use. Before I get into an interview like this, I ask them, please bring through me the perfect words at the perfect time, in the perfect way, in the perfect amount for the people who are going to hear this and for everyone. And they do. The entities that wrote the book later called themselves the wisdom keepers of lost civilization. Just about the time of the Schumann resonance anomaly, Schumann. He designed the Schumann resonance of the Earth, and it has to do with lightning strikes, the energies that are coming into the Earth and such. During this anomaly, instead of having normal-looking graph kinds of patterns and such, it made beautiful dimensional. The pictures of that anomaly are just fantastically beautiful geometric patterns that don't fit anywhere else, and no one's been able to explain them. During that time, they gave me their name as the Wisdom Keepers. They also showed me themselves. They paraded in front of me, the Atlantean and the person from Mu, the person from Chaco, and there's the Angkor Wat. They were people of their time who were helping with their societies, and they watched as their societies crumbled because they had allowed themselves to give away their own personal power to a singular power that be a leader, and that leader had taken the power and separated the people and used it to their advantage. And they want, more than anything, to help us avoid that fate, because there is a way to do so. And so they're here at this time to help us to make it through this time and live in the new world that's coming.